Hello and welcome to the channel for the Hamilton-Halton Construction Association Young Leaders Group. This video is part 1 of the 2020 YLG Talks Safety Edition, featuring Kevin Brown. I will pass it over to the YLG co-chair Christina Murray for introductions.
Welcome everyone. We've got a great attendance this morning. I know it's a little bit different way of doing our YLG Talks, but we're really happy to have everyone out this morning. We've got 2 great speakers lined up. So we've got, we're starting with Kevin Brown from Cobalt Safety, and he's going to be talking about where we're at right now with COVID. We'll have a few minutes intermission if it's necessary, but I think we'll do a Q&A, and then we'll move on to Patrick, and he'll be talking about the legal aspects of COVID and what employers are doing to protect themselves. And then we should be wrapped up by 9:30, but I'd like to turn the floor over to Kevin. Thank you for joining us, Kevin.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. My name is Kevin Brown. I'm with Cobalt Safety. I'm the CEO here, and we've been having a whole lot of fun with COVID. I'm sure just like every other employer in Ontario, trying to figure out where we're going, what we're doing, and what we're at. I wanted to start real quick with just a bit of a synopsis of where we've been, because it's been 100 days since our first case here in Ontario, which was actually yesterday, was our 100th day. And that all started with a person who was 50 years of age who'd actually traveled from Wuhan into Toronto and was registered at the Sunnybrook Healthcare, and that was January 23rd. So we've come a long ways. In those past 100 days now, we've had over 60,000 cases in Canada. In Ontario, there's been 17,923 cases. 12,000 cases have been resolved, and we've had over 1,300 deaths here. And about 44% of those deaths are people 60 plus in age. We've had 4 workplace fatalities due to COVID-19. They're all in the healthcare sector, or workers in the healthcare sector. Obviously, they're hands-on, they're right at the front lines of this stuff, so we've lost 4 workers there. There's been a couple cases in construction. The one that I know about very well is the three employees at the Eglinton Crosstown. So far as I know, we haven't had any fatalities in construction, which is good. Just to recap a little bit so we can see where we've been, March 17th was the first time they declared that state of emergency here in Ontario from Doug Ford. So that first state of emergency, they closed those non-essential businesses. Construction really wasn't one of those ones at the beginning. So we saw our bars and our restaurants and recreationals and libraries and parks and churches all closed. But we remained open as a construction sector with eyes on us for procedures and stuff like that. So, and one of the problems we ran into is not everybody was taking it seriously at that time. We also started seeing in around the middle of March there, the government started telling everyone, use social distancing. That's what they used to call it. We call it physical distancing now. Stay those 6 feet apart, wash your hands, keep everything clean and sanitized. Hand sanitizer became hard to find. I'm sure we're all well aware of that stuff. We were informed of what we should be looking for in regards to workers and screening and stuff like that. And the symptoms of COVID-19 themselves, we have cough, we have fever, we have difficulty breathing. A lot of this stuff we are very aware of now, but if you go back, we were just learning about it. And they were saying if you're sick, just stay home. Some construction sites started, and this is where we were at in the middle of March, started to increase their cleaning and sanitation, providing more wash and servicing, hand washing stations. However, some were not actually following this stuff, and those social distancing wasn't being followed, wasn't being taken care seriously, and the cleaning requirements were not being taken seriously. And we started seeing, a lot more concerns being raised out there. Some of the construction sites started putting policies in place around the 17th of March. A lot of our clients actually were getting some of their first policies around that 17th of March on how to proceed and what we're going to do. And it was a moving target, really, to tell you the truth. We were starting here, and then as we progressed, we kept moving and kept updating and changing. But in around that time, we also started seeing a lot of unions raising their issues on sites, which started being very vocal about the health and safety of their members. We saw large numbers of workers putting in work refusals, raising their own personal concerns about their own safety, their family members, So it was a very interesting time, especially from the safety perspective. I can tell you, I was receiving on average anywhere from 100 to 122 calls a day. I felt more like a bell phone operator at that time, and I'm sure Patrick, when he comes up, he'll be able to tell you the same idea. But by mid-March, they started confirming the COVID was actually being more community transmitted. So we started seeing that come along in mid-March. By this time, the government started reacting a lot more, and this is where on April 3rd, they shut down. They got tighter on their essential services. And I think maybe a lot of people on here were affected by some of that tightening as they tightened around what businesses could be open, what couldn't be open, how did that affect us in the construction sector. At that time, we went into non-essentials, so the only things that could be open for construction were our projects associated with healthcare sectors, critical provincial infrastructures, industrial activities around maintenance for petrochemical plants and refineries and so on, petrochemical situations. And then we saw they left the residential construction sectors open also, but you had very specifics. You already had to be building, you already had to have above ground permits, or you're already building your houses by that point. So, and then any activities that we were able to do to close those sites. So that was pretty much it. When they came on the 3rd, they said, this is what we expect now. And I think we saw some of that due to the pressures of concerned people and citizens and workers, and also what the ministry itself had been seeing on job sites. They were out there looking, they were out there watching, they're out there seeing, and they didn't like what they were seeing, so we saw them tighten up those sectors. We started getting a lot of questions at that time about, are we essential? Are we not essential? I'm sure Patrick, when he gets on here, will talk about that a lot too. Lawyers were quickly trying to determine. So on a Friday, you're essential, but by Monday, by the time the lawyers had sat down and looked at stuff, we were non-essentials. If you had building permits sitting there waiting to come from the city, if you didn't have them in your hand, you weren't getting them. So the city was stopping stuff. We were seeing them slow down. Basically, we ran into almost 50 shades of gray, because as the government put it out there, they really didn't define it or explain it very well. So it took a little bit of time for companies to catch on to what's there and what's not. The other thing that we did see there in that period of time was the critical construction. So they allowed for any healthcare sector stuff that was being built, they opened it up to allow them to run 24/7. So they were able to build 24/7 without violating of the noise bylaws. So that was good to get some of the projects that they needed to get done. They had to get them done. The MOL did increase a lot of their inspections on projects. We had less construction projects going on, and so people began to see more inspectors. And the MOL was looking for procedures for COVID-19 on the project. So they were looking to see, do you have any written procedures? They were looking to see is your project clean? Is your project sanitized? Are you maintaining your social distancing or your physical distancing? How are you managing the hazard? So it's just like any other safety hazard. When you look at COVID, it comes down to what's the hazard, what's your controls, can you prove those controls, can you show me that they're working? So that's what they kind of ran into. One of the big issues that the MOL was looking for, and they're going to continue to look for, so is the washrooms. So I always state we don't want to forget the fact that the Green Book never went away. Right, all those legislation requirements for safety never went away. Some of them got augmented, and one of them was around the washroom section, was that section 29.2 sub 2. And that really states that each cleanup facilities shall meet the following requirements. And this became interesting because they were starting to enforce this on sites. The facility shall have a wash basin with running water, both hot and cold running water shall be available if reasonably possible. So that particular piece became quite interesting. I'm going to talk about it for a second because some of us may have these challenges going forward. What do they mean by hot and cold running water? Well, that's what they mean, hot and cold running water on the site when for the cleanup stations. So as we were adding additional cleanup stations, people were trying to figure out, how do I put hot and cold running water? Do I got to pipe it? Do I got to find a plumber? So we were getting a lot of calls around that time. I also did a lot of talking with some of the associations that I do normally work with all the time. And what we determined is that back in 2017, I think it is Ministry of Labor had a set of guidelines. So they were doing washroom blitzes. And part of that blitz structure was their guideline sections. It's very good to find out because if you can get those guidelines. But the MOL guideline discussed hot and cold running water. So the expectation is if you have power on your site, you should be able to have running water. That's how the Ministry of Labor has actually looked at it. So now how do I get hot and cold? Well, part of their actual guidelines also stated if you can't do hot and cold, then warm water would be sufficient. So we started looking at that. What do they mean? How do we get some warm water on site? Well, it's probably better to get warm water on site than hot and cold because you're piping two different types of water. So one of the things we started looking up was what's called a camp kitchen. And if you look up a camp kitchen, it's basically a kitchen you would make for your own campsites. And we started seeing these people, they would have like a nice wooden thing and they put a hand basin in it. And they had a method of putting a jug up there with some warm water, with running water up top. And they had their towels. So that's something that we actually started seeing on construction sites was as a form of a camp kitchen. And they would build their own facility. And then if you remember our old orange, they're not old, but the orange water coolers we use in the summertime to keep the water cold, a lot of construction companies were starting to add warm water into those, and then they would just set them up, and then they would use the gravity feed to give them the running water. So it was interesting because the legislation doesn't actually give me water temperature, and it doesn't give me water pressure. It just says hot and cold running water. So those have been accepted on the Ministry of Labor. They've been taking them on sites as long as they're kept clean. They're working, and the workers have additional hand stations. So you'll see these stations out there. Soap, hand cleaner, sanitizer is good, and paper towels. Don't use rags or anything that people have to exchange or save. So that was one of the biggest challenges that we saw. Another challenge that we saw, and this will be a challenge for us. That's a challenge for us now, but it's also a challenge for us going forward. And so with this one is they started making a call for PPE. And if you had masks, send them to the healthcare sector and everything else. And so we saw some companies actually send all their PPE to the healthcare sector, which was fantastic. I commend anybody that's done that. But they also ran into an issue where all of a sudden they're still an essential construction service. They were running into silica hazards, cutting concrete hazards. They were running into asbestos work that they had to do. So part of that stuff is they've given away their PPE. So it becomes a balance of deciding, what PPE is extra and what PPE required for yourself. So we did start running into those N95 issues. We're starting to get back to supply now, but it's been a while now since we've really had a good solid supply of PPE out there that construction has been able to access. The MO also during this period of time and found themselves understaffed. I don't know if many people know, but in Ontario, there's approximately just over 400 Ministry of Labor inspectors. That's it, 400 inspectors. In Ontario, we know of about 419,000 workplaces in the province of Ontario. So the ratio is very, very scarce if you want to get down to it. So the ministry found themselves in a very interesting position. They were getting constant work refusals. So the inspectors were going to refusal after refusal after refusal. They were still having to deal with any kind of critical accidents. Some incidents have been done by phone based on the inspector's ability to be able to do it by phone or not. If they could, they'd have to come out, they came out. But they were also getting lots of complaints. So between the prioritizing of the inspector's job, which is, accidents first and then refusals and complaints, the inspections that they were hoping everybody could do, they're secondary to what their primary job was. So at that point, they added 30 employment standard officers to their list. So as of April, and that's where we were, and as of April 30th, so this kind of catches us up, the MOLs actually shut down 18 jobs completely. So in that period of time, in those first 100 days, they've shut down 18 jobs completely. They conducted 1,866 field visits, and they've issued over 1,435 orders. As for tickets and prosecutions, I don't have that number yet. I don't know if they have. I haven't heard of any, but that doesn't mean they can't. So that's kind of where we've been. I want to kind of go where we're going, and I'm not going to spend as much time on it because it's still fairly new for most of us. But as of May 1st, Premier Ford has actually stated we're going to phase open and we're going to reopen business here. And so construction, believe it or not, has been one of those first ones. And I think we're going to see us open up faster than any other industry because we've proven as an industry that during all of this, we've been able to manage our COVID response better than a lot of companies. One thing about construction, which I got to say, is that we're fairly adaptable and we can deal with problems quickly, which is just part of our normal job day to day anyway. So this has been good for us to lead the way a little bit. So, but what they've opened up now is site preparation, excavation, and services for institutional, commercial, and industrial and residential development. So that's all open now. The province is also reopening any construction project that includes shipping and logistics. If your project is broadband, telecommunications, or digital infrastructure, that's open. Any project that supports the improved delivery of goods and services. Municipal projects are starting to open up, colleges and university construction projects, childcare center projects, schools. And like I said, the sewer water main industry is all back up and opening now for site preparation, excavation, and site servicing works. Also, as of April 30th, the Ministry of Labor has actually added 58 more inspectors. So they've added 30 just before, and now we've added 58 more. So they've actually put in an additional 88 inspectors into the system to help and assist the inspectors that are currently there. Those inspectors were gleaned off employment standards, TSSA, and what they are is these inspectors have been directed to basically provide like an outreach information to employers and workers. They're going to show up on your site. They're there to ask questions. They have a set of questions they're supposed to ask. They'll ask those questions of the employer. They'll ask those questions of the workers. They're looking to see, is the employer doing what they're supposed to be doing? If they have any concerns on that site, they will call a Ministry of Labor inspector themselves to come up and follow up. So the inspectors that are showing up are technically not there doing full construction inspections on your site. So you may get one. So you don't know what you're going when they show up. They're going to represent themselves as Ministry of Labor. But the ones that are doing more of the outreach stuff, they're going to ask questions, and if you satisfy those questions, you've got your policies and programs in place. They can see that the site is running in a controlled and efficient manner. They're probably just going to carry on to the next site. If they are seeing issues or they have concerns or there's some feedback that's coming back from the workers, that inspector now will refer to the Ministry of Labor's management or to another inspector to actually come and follow up with the workplace. The MOL has actually stated that they have fines up to $750 that can be issued from inspectors for this stuff, but I also want to reiterate that the Ministry of Labor still has the options for its Part 3 fines, and those still carry the maximum penalties, which are $1.5 million per offense. What are they looking for? So I'll give you a brief idea of what they're looking for, and Patrick may speak to some of this too. They're looking for a COVID-19 policy. Have you established a policy? It doesn't have to be 10 pages. It's, do you have a policy on how to deal with this? Have you provided the workers information? Because we still have to provide workers information, which you guys can do through toolbox talks or safety talks. Make sure you're documenting that you've done these things, because we still want to make sure our due diligence is in place. Do you have job site procedures and protocols? In other words, how do you keep your job clean? How do you keep your site safe? What have you done? Have you limited coffee trucks? Have you increased your cleaning schedules? That type of stuff. If you've closed your offices on site, what have you done with your first aid stations? Do workers still have access to those pieces that they still need no matter what? Are you doing screening methods? On some sites now, we are actually doing body screening, temperature screening. If you're getting into that, just be a little careful on that stuff. You cannot record any medical information of somebody. There is legal opinion out here now that 25(2)H, in conjunction with other methods of COVID screening, body temperature screening would be a reasonable precaution, as long as you're not using that information in a discriminatory format where you're actually recording the medical data. So just watch that one. If you have any questions, you can call me on that after. Maybe Patrick can speak to that too. COVID-19 personal protection measures. So what kind of PPE are you using? Have you taught the workers how to care and clean for it? Are they washing their clothes often? Are they cleaning their tools often? Does the constructor employer have written response procedures? So this is an interesting thing. If a worker says, I'm sick on your job site, I'm not feeling well, I'm feeling dizzy, I have a sore throat, what are your responses for the job site? You have to think about that ahead of time, because you have to put protocols in place on how you're going to deal with that particular response. Doesn't mean they have COVID-19, doesn't mean they don't have it. So what is your response around it? You also may want to get into what's called a written contract management of cases. So if you do have somebody that does have COVID or is in self-isolation or reported it, how are you managing those cases from the perspective of not just them, but we also have to, what kind of context have they been in contact with? So you may want to have some procedures around that. One of the other things we ran into, and I'm not going to speak much longer, but one of the other things we did run into there was this physical distancing of 6 feet. Is that a law? And when it comes to construction sites, there are some jobs where we have to be within that 6 feet of each other. We have no choice. It's for the safety of the workers. It's the safety of the job. Some things need to be picked up by 2 people. Some work, like you get down in the trench, you want to connect some stuff. Some of that stuff has to be done within that 6 feet of distance. So if you have to do that, what is your procedure? Do you have procedures around that? If not, give me a shout. There is procedures and methods you can actually do that for those short duration types of work when you need to. Also, questionnaires around COVID-19. How are you screening your workers when they come to site? What are your guidelines around that? What's your visitor policies for your offices? There's posters that they put out there. I recommend those posters get posted in the workplace, just like you have your policies up there. Put your Ontario posters up, put your public health posters up. If a worker has to self-monitor or self-isolate, what is the difference? All that kind of stuff should be there. So that's there's a lot around it. It's not difficult. It's just it needs to be there. It needs to be communicated to the workers. You want to stay informed on your own information. Keep it there. Just to kind of wrap up, in the future, I see construction coming back faster than any industry from this particular situation. I foresee some issues still around workers not wanting to come back to work. There's lots of fear around work still. Some of those things will pose some questions, and Patrick can talk to that. When a worker is feeling that they don't want to come back to work, maybe their family, they don't want to put their family in jeopardy. How do we deal with those issues? We're still going to see some issues around work refusals when they come up, and how do we handle those work refusals? I see we may see some issues around public and safety concerns. They're going to see construction guys out there working, and that the public loves to call and complain. You're still going to see those interactions taking place. We're going to see some issues around physical distancing, relaxing too early on construction sites. So please watch this, guys. They're releasing the industry, but we still got to stay very vigilant on the expectations of what's out there. So, keep on your workers, keep the physical distancing there. Don't get too comfortable. Don't start relaxing. Let's be the industry that needs to shine and go forward the best. I think if we stay focused, we'll be that industry that pulls through this better than anyone. And in closing, I'd like to add that I'm very proud. My background is 31 years, heavy civil, 3 generations, heavy construction. I've owned my own construction company before I became an inspector, and then being an inspector was a great experience for me to come back to being a consultant. So I've grown up in the construction industry, and I got to say I'm proud. I'm very proud of what we've done as an industry. They always look at construction as, the construction guys. Yeah, well, the construction guys just came through COVID-19, and we've come through it very, very well with no fatalities and with procedures in place, and we've been leading the way when it comes to workplaces that can stay open. So I think that's important for us to say and to take a bit of a pat on the back, but like I said, don't relax. We have to keep our stuff and our measures in place, and we can get through this. I think we can come through this well. So that's it for me and my little talk. And I definitely want to say thank you to the association and having me part of this. I love doing this part of safety, and every time I get a chance to do it, I'm more than happy to come back and talk about anything else sometime too. So thank you, Kristen.
Thank you very much, Kevin. We really appreciate that. I don't know if everyone claps or if we do the hand waves.
I can't see anybody anyway. I see you.
We have a few questions that have come in for you. The first one is from Brendan Johnson. He says, can you dismiss a worker from site if they show no other symptoms and feel fine, but fail a temperature reading once and or a few times within a 20-minute window?
So this is where your policies and procedures need to be tight on what you can and can't do. Body temperature screening is not foolproof, and it's not 100% accurate. Basically what you're doing is a surface temperature screen. So when you take a screen of somebody, you're just screening their surface skin. So if they happen to be outside and it's cold, their skin is cold, it'll read that. If they've been wearing a toque and working out really hard, it'll read that. You can run into issues, where people may have physical conditions of where the body heats up or cools down. So you test, you check. If they screen hot, then you can have them sit for a few minutes, keep them isolated. Check them again. If they do come back at that time, the reference should be to have them contact telehealth. You're not dismissing them from site. Have them contact Telehealth Ontario or their doctor and get further advice and information at that time. But I think for the safety of all workers, it would be a reasonable precaution to have them checked if they are showing those signs of fever. So.
Very good. And then we've got one more. Oh, sorry, what's that?
And call Patrick.
And we've got one more. Tanya is saying, what is the role of a bylaw officer? We have seen city bylaw officers give opinions on whether jobs are essential or not. Who has the authority to say that a job is essential or not?
So the essential list itself is the actual authority. So where they've listed the requirements, that's it. When it comes to bylaw officers and being able to give opinions or not opinions, pretty much if even a Ministry of Labor inspector, they're all under what's called the Provincial Offences Act. So they're all officers that have the ability under Provincial Offences Act. If you're not in agreement with their opinion, I would listen to what they're saying to you, and at that point in time, you may want to contact. You're going to need a legal opinion on what they're telling you versus whether you stay open or don't stay open. It's tough because there's lots of opinions out there. What we need is factual information. So if you're determined and you are able to stay open, make sure you have that, that you understand that 100%. If somebody's telling you something different than that, you're going to want a legal opinion on what's being told to you before you close or before you overreact to what they're telling you to. So it's just respect. There's lots of unknowns at this time. Lots of people are trying to do a lot of good things and trying to help. There's also lots of media, lots of fear. But all of this comes down to just being properly educated, really understanding those legislations, where it says it, what section does it say, being able to answer those questions at the time you're asked those questions.
Very good. And is there any other questions out there? If anyone's got a question, they can raise their hand or they can submit it on the Zoom group chat there on the side. So if I don't see anything else, do you have a question, Aaron? Aaron.
So Kevin, quick question for you. So what's the biggest complaint or the biggest relief that workers have requested or come to you for at this stage from your exposure? Like what's the one, is it hand washing? What's the biggest concern that you're seeing and the biggest solution that requested?
Well, Aaron, I'm going to give you a little insight to the Ministry of Labor. Number one complaint the Ministry of Labor has received, not just during COVID-19, but receives at all time, is washrooms on a job site. It's the one thing that workers will bypass the internal responsibility system for. They will contact the ministry directly when their washrooms are not clean, and when the site, they don't have the facilities for themselves at that human level. That's always been the number one way to get the devil to dinner. If you want to bring the ministry to site, just don't clean your washrooms. I would say this is going to be the same continuous thing going forward. Where we are right now with site cleanliness, washrooms, and hand cleaning, believe it or not, is probably where we should have been for many, many years. So the expectation that's on site, learn to maintain that, put that in place, because that is the thing. Workers are there 8-10 hours a day. They need to be able to wash their hands to eat their lunch. They need to be able to use a washroom. It's just respect, but it's one of the biggest complaints the Ministry of Labor will receive. Prior to, during this, and I guarantee as we go forward, it's the one the workers will bring forward the most.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kevin. I think that's it for questions, and I think we're getting ready for Patrick now to take over. And I think there's one more question there. It just came in. Hi, in regards to temperature screening, if we cannot record the actual temperature screenings, are we allowed to record with a yes or no if someone is above 38, or should we not be recording anything?
It's a good question. So the Norman Keith, who's a OHS lawyer here in Ontario, has some good articles up on some of this stuff. What it is that body temperature screening is not to be used on its own. You should be having your questionnaires, your other formats of screening. It's just additional to. No, you shouldn't be keeping records of stuff. So basically, you check their COVID questionnaire. If they've answered yes and they have no issues with any of that stuff, then you do a quick temperature screen. If they don't register, then you just let them pass. So we don't do yes or no or positives or we don't even record the worker with screen. We do the physical screening with the actual documentation. The temperature screening is just an additional thing there. So just be careful with that. Please get advice from a lawyer if you're going to be using temperature screening, or give us a contact. We have all the information here. We are doing it currently when we need to. You just want to make sure that you have all the right protocols in place from a human rights standpoint, and also from a safety standpoint, reasonable precaution requirements.
Okay, one last question, and then we got to move on. Does MOL have a COVID standard for construction?
The MOL doesn't have a COVID standard for construction. They have a lot of information available through the Ontario government website. The Canadian Construction Association, there's one for all of you. The Canadian Construction Association did put together a standard for COVID response to construction. I do believe it's out there. Last one I saw was version 1. There may be a version 2 now. Some of the stuff I've worked from that standard too. So there is the Canadian Construction Association does have that out there. Maybe our association can find that and reference it over to you, or you can find it yourself on their sites.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Kevin. We really appreciate all your information. And if anyone's got any more questions, we can share Kevin's contact information moving forward.
Thanks so much for watching. Be sure to check out our channel for part 2 of the YLG Talks Safety Edition, featuring Patrick Ganley on employment and labor issues related to COVID-19. With a quick thanks to our sponsors, Simpson Wagle, MTE Consultants, Aeron Group of Companies, Budget Demolition, Bessling Mechanical, and the Guarantee Company. Hope to chat with you soon. Thanks.